voted?
Yes.
Thank you. Public appearances, is there anyone that has anything they wish to discuss as a non-agenda item from the public? Okay, hearing none, we're gonna move ahead. Reading and approval of minutes from 8/13/25.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Thank you, trustee McReynolds. Need a second?
Second.
I need one on the village committee.
Oh,
Well, yeah, I love it, Doug.
Pat or
Second.
All
Joshua?
right, Patrick Conrad's a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on, discussion on a draft contract for 2026 and beyond to provide for police services jointly between the village and town of Waterford. Review of draft contract, discussion of terms, and consider appropriate motion for action. Thank you all for being here. This time we now have a new chief of police. It's a different world within our policing community than it was 6 months ago, and things appear to be really stable with the town and the police department. So what is included in the packet for all of you, and everybody, I hope, got a chance to review that document, is a draft contract for services that addresses a number of points. It doesn't go so deep as to contemplate within the draft total level of staffing. It gives some idea of how we're going to share costs between the community and stops short of forming what would be considered under Wisconsin statutes a true joint department with a joint police commission to oversee the hiring, firing. Instead, this is a in spirit joint department that is a contracted service between the village and town. I will make a note at this point that capital between the two needs to be addressed for how we're going to handle that. So I'll just kind of go page by page, and we can discuss things as we need to. So beginning on page 3 of the packet, contract for services, there's the preamble, discussion of the geographic scope of enforcement, which is the village and town. Supervision, which is it places the department under the supervision of the town police chief or his or her designee, in this case his, by way of a ranking officer, and shares powers, village police powers with town officers deemed sworn in performance of their duties. Any questions on page 3? Pretty straightforward preamble stuff. Okay. Moving on to page 4, I've highlighted a relatively large yellow section here because it's an attempt to talk about oversight and how oversight might go. I think that it probably needs some work, or maybe not. So the idea behind this is to have a joint police operations oversight committee. So this is not the PFC. This does not have hire, fire, promote, demote authority. This is really to act as an advisory committee to the chief and as a liaison back to members of the public that, hey, we do have a civilian oversight body that is looking at police operations, and should someone lodge a complaint about a police officer or department member, the chief at least would have the opportunity to forward, if appropriate, those items on. So if they pertain to an ethical item of nature or something of that order. So the idea behind this was it would consist of 3 residents of each community, and I wrote it that way specifically to be a divestiture of power from trustees or supervisors. So these are 3 individual citizens, non-elected members on that. The committee shall review operations policies, capital and operating budgets, crime and call volume data, and other data that would assist them in understanding the crime situation and policing needs of the 2 communities in order to make policy recommendations respectively to the town and village boards. There are times that police encounter things that we need to make ordinance amendments or adjustments because something's changed in the world of crime or something's changed in the world of property. We need to stay on top of it. Golf carts, is an example that's come up recently, in that there was a change in some state statutes, and now it turns out if we amend our ordinances, they can go down the highway and on the bridge, but they have to be appropriately licensed and insured and have turn signals and seat belts and windshields and all the other things, and so they're considered low-speed vehicles, not just golf carts. So the police chief, town chairman, town police liaison, village administrator, and village president shall all serve as ex officio members, i.e. those that were just named have both a right and a responsibility to attend the meetings, They get to speak at the meetings, but they don't have a vote at the meetings. The town chairman and village president shall serve as alternate chairperson of the committee and shall not have a vote. The committee shall not have the power to review specific police officer performance and not have the power to hire, fire, promote, demote. I mentioned that earlier. In terms of, you know, who reports to who, you know, having a situation, you know, pertaining to law enforcement's difficult enough of a job on its own, let alone having 17 different individuals that you might think are your boss, right? So where does that come from or go to? And so, you know, what I wrote in here is the town police liaison shall relay policy matters of importance to the town to the chief of police, who shall do his or her best to execute those policies objectives. The village administrator shall relay policy matters of importance to the village to the chief of police, so shall do his or her best to execute those policy objectives. So the chief reports to the town police liaison and village administrators on matters of policy. The town police liaison and village administrator provide input to the chief as to targeted enforcement and special patrols. The chief of police and his or her designee shall provide a written report monthly to the village and town board on police activity. So it's a chain of command. There's this big policy structure, day-to-day stuff. Who are you coming to? If it's a town matter, it's town police liaison. If it's a village matter, it's village administrator. And then, you know, bigger policy things are going to that operations and oversight committee. Ancillary duties, in addition to patrol functions pertaining to enforcement of state law and local ordinance, responding to calls for service, conducting crime prevention patrols, and proactive policing. The village shall further support with its contracted police officer the following ancillary duties. And so I listed some of those things out that we're doing. One of them in particular is enforce the village's dog at large ordinance and impound dogs picked up within the village boundaries. So we have a holding facility at DPW. I'm not actually sure how the town does that. They also have a holding facility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So staffing is a topic I think we'll spend some time talking about. So a full-time officer shared between both communities for first shift, a full-time officer shared between both communities for second shift. In this contract version, I wrote full-time officer shared for third shift. I expect we're going to have a good bit of conversation around that. Right now, the village is contracted with the sheriff's department to provide that third shift coverage. And so the village would either need to continue that contract and just have some duplicate coverage during third shift, or it would need to discontinue that contract and instead relying on the town for third shift coverage. That's a conversation point. And a full-time chief. So we're looking at 5 full-time officers, including the SRO, would be a part of this contract document. And then there are some that I wrote in here as placeholders. So for example, part-time coverage totaling 400 hours. We need to dial in the number based on the total number of full-time officers. So 400 was just a placeholder. 250 hours a year for special duty. Right now, the village has a special duty budget that's about $50,000 a year. We've used that in the past for when we need to do stepped up patrols. So examples of stepped up patrols, we have had a number of patrols on East Main Street where we have simply done semi-enforcement on East Main Street. With that road coming up under construction, the reason that it is posted in those semis is not because there's a safety issue with semis going down the road. It is to preserve the pipes underneath the ground on the fractured concrete. So when we have weighted vehicles to travel down that roadway, we get water and sewer line breaks that ultimately cause problems such as sewer backups, which I think you're familiar with, Trustee McReynolds. So, you know, while we might not be doing targeted enforcement on East Main Street, we might need to do targeted enforcement in some other capacity. Back when the Roe v. Wade case was taken down, we did special patrols around the churches for fear of vandalism around that. When we had Black Lives Matter come into town and protest on a couple of occasions, we did some stepped up stuff with that. So just, hey, there's something going on. We need to put some extra officers on duty to attenuate whatever that is. There should be a bucket of money that both communities fund and pull from to be able to create some additional safety buffer. Other things that are contemplated in this contract, it says no police clerk shall be employed under this contract without special action by both the village board and town board to authorize funding for such position. And a joint clerk of court shall be employed part-time by the town, the cost of which shall be shared between both communities. So right now, we employ a court clerk and a judge. The town employs a court clerk and a judge that should be under one individual, and we should look at consolidating courts. Over time, that might be coinciding with an election cycle, or that might be ultimately, hey, we're just gonna maintain one clerk of court but two judges. Those are conversation points for us to have. Right now, the village is not earning enough in citation revenue to cover the cost of the court, let alone any policing activities. So we're bringing in about $50,000 a year in citation revenue, and we're spending about $70,000 a year in prosecutorial services, the judge's salary, and a court clerk's salary. So while this is a joint committee of the two entities here, those of you that have been to our finance committee meetings, you've heard me say that upon Kathy Lindblom's retirement, we're going to need to go down one FTE and replace that maybe with some part-time labor. That was in looking at where we all could pick up some potential cost savings. Mike May was kind enough to pull forward and send out some information regarding the State's Innovation Fund grant. This is one of the items that would be eligible for that State Innovation Fund grant if we look at consolidating that activity. So SRO essentially stays like it is. The money would come on to the town's set of books rather than the village's set of books directly, and it would just go towards offsetting the cost because, again, as a joint contracted service, all revenues are joint, all expenses are joint. Make sense? Okay. So how do we share the cost of services? We're going to go on to page 6. This was a spitball thing. Cost sharing shall be calculated based on I typed in a place of a 50-50 weighted formula. 50% of it proportionally based on population, 50% based on equalized assessed value, and then proportionally those lumped together. So the way that this worked out is the town of Waterford is 65-14, which is 54.1% of the total population between the two communities. The village is 55-42, so 45.9% of the total population. And then the equalized assessed values you can see on the document for 2024. So 56.1 town, 43.9 village. And if you average those out, it means that the total cost of services will be 55.1% for town, 44.9% village. There's one piece that I missed, and that is boat patrol. And that is covered under the part-time hour piece. So just want to make sure I made mention of that. In this contract document, I wrote exclusions to costs for police services. Costs associated with litigation or settlements that arise from actions related to the police department from January 1st, 2022 through May 15th, 2025. The village did not play a role in decisions related to the quote-unquote disbandment of the Waterford Police Department. The village should be left harmless in that situation. The town should bear the costs associated with that. Number 2, cost of capital. I would like for us to address that one today and not leave that as an exclusion. I believe that we should share the cost of capital jointly, and that essentially means that we're going to marry and never get divorced, right? Because divorce is going to be costly between the parties. Because now you got to figure out how to split things up. Right now, the village owns assets, the town owns assets, and if we went through a divorce, that's fine. It's like having separate bank accounts. You take your assets, you go separate ways. So that made the last divorce, at least somewhat palatable. But when we talk about truly sharing officers, and we, at least on the village side, compare what the alternates would be, there never is quote-unquote cost savings in policing. There's just less policing, right? So anybody out there that is pitching that there are quote-unquote cost savings to be had, vastly apparent has not attended schooling for public administration, because you don't get savings, you just get less. It means less officers on the street, less man hours on patrol, less investigations. That's just how it works. So by sharing an officer between the jurisdictions, that's a recognition of the relative low crime rates in the town, relative low crime rates in the village, and the types of crimes that are involved, and an assessment that, hey, we can share this officer and have them deploy across the jurisdictional boundary to solve the problems of Mr. and Mrs. Smith and what they're dealing with. I would also tell you that both boards should be amenable to consider recommendations of the chief a year out, and if it turns out that we need step up patrol on weekends, for example, or an officer that maybe we need a second SRO. I'm not sure what those needs will be, but I think you guys need a chance to evaluate and go, hey, this is where we're falling a little short. I'm going to give you one example, and that's whenever we have a chapter for an EMS call, We, as EMS providers, can't just take somebody to the hospital against their will. They have to consent. Sometimes they don't want to consent. That means we got to call an officer. And if we don't have an officer, we're just hanging out. And it's really awkward to sit in the back of that ambulance with somebody who doesn't know who they are, but is conscious. So you're just hanging out waiting. So it's important we have an officer and sufficient officers to deal with those things that come up. Cost of dispatch. Don't know, Trustee McReynolds, do you have any additional information on this one?
I would say that cost of dispatch, the county will be having conversation with all municipalities in the very near future. There is a new dispatch center being constructed right now. Radios, whatnot, a big equipment purchase has been made. So there will be discussions on all municipalities partaking in the cost of that. The exact dollar amount has not been calculated. That's still being figured on what each municipality's share will be, but that is coming. And on top of that, there will be additional cost for just dispatching.
Yep. So one of the things that happened in the past was you operated your own dispatch, and the city of Burlington operated its own dispatch, and the city of Racine operated its own dispatch. And Mount Pleasant, yeah. So I'm going to presume that when that conversation comes up, I know the county has good reasons for why they're going to do all that and the cost structure of governance, within the county's operations, but it's logical to presume that all the respective communities are at least going to analyze the cost of contracting service with the county versus the contracting service with another municipality jointly or to handle it on their own. And the reason I wrote that in there specifically is to say, look, if that comes up, guys, we got to sit back down to the table and have a conversation about what we're going to do. Are we going to write a check to the county to handle dispatch? Are we going to do dispatch in-house? Are we going to go over to another entity like City of Burlington and buy onto their system? And I don't think there's anybody who has an answer to any of it right now. It's just hey, it's on the radar and it's going to need to be talked about. So the town's going to invoice the village for actual cost of operations, and the rest of it is a bunch of legalese around binding effect and entire agreement and dispute resolution should nasty things come up. And it also clearly spells out on page 8, section 10, that the town's officers are independent contractors of the village, not employees of the village. So there's the 30,000 foot overview. Eddie, where have you guys gotten with your conversations? Where's stuff at? I'm going to hand it over to you for a minute.
Well, is this the question and answer period?
Sure.
So I got two questions for you.
Okay.
I guess the most important one is there anything, or can we avoid what we went through the last 15, 16 months? Is there any kind of insurance? We go through all of this, in other words, and then what? We get new elected officials or whatever, and now are we back to May of 2024?
So it may be worthwhile to discuss what might be considered a poison pill. I got a call earlier today from a concerned resident about this who said, hey, you guys really should discuss putting something in that contract that makes it unpalatable. So I would state from the village's side, I don't think the village has ever had any genuine intention to contract away from the town situation. I mean, we get the best of both worlds, right? The guys wear Waterford on the shirt, and it just happens to be town of Waterford versus the village of Waterford. Right? So from the resident's perspective, like, it's just Waterford. The thing that I would put out for contemplation would be something like the town is, and this is what was in an old contract or a version of it. The town is fiscally responsible for continuation of payments and benefits related to any discontinuation of police operations. And if we wanted to go one more than that, the town's fiscally responsible for, I don't know, let's say a year of the cost of policing in the village, right? And if that's your alternate, all of a sudden it becomes really unpalatable to undo this thing.
What we have here is two governing boards. We have the village and the town.
Right.
And again, come election time, whatever, and might be a difference of opinion about what should be provided for law enforcement. So that's always been a question in my mind. Even before this,
Sure.
your proposal.
Sure.
It's like, are we gonna see this every election
Right.
cycle? Which, you know, we really can't.
So, the, the only thing we really can do is analyze efficiency, right? So if for example, the sheriff's department wanted to provide coverage to the village on a one-to-one basis, i.e. An officer first shift, an officer second shift, an officer third shift, an SRO, part-time fill-in, there's a 100% cost capture to do that. And if they turned around and had that same conversation with the town, right, there's a 100% cost capture coming from the town. So in other words, we're gonna pay for double the coverage. There's nothing to say the sheriff couldn't come in with a proposal that says, hey, town and village, I'll take over management of your services and I'll take your contract and just do exactly what's going on here, right? And elected boards in the future would have to contemplate that. But so far the sheriff has not made such a proposal to either communities, because it represents in fact a net result in lower levels of policing. I'm of the opinion professionally that, I'll say it again, I've said it in other meetings, we're a bit over-policed, or have been a bit over-policed relative to the crime that's here. And I think what you just saw was political pushback from elected officials in one of the communities looking at expenses related to policing. There's a number of public comments about saving money, and I'm putting that in air quotes. So that tells me that elected official also believed that the community was over-policed, and that, by reducing total number of man hours of patrol, that there were cost savings available to the resident. I wouldn't have personally framed it that way, but there's some logic behind what that individual said. And on the table today is sharing an officer. That gets us the best of both worlds.
We can also, answering Eddie's question, you can also do contract length and renewal kickers. So
Sure.
if you had a 5-year contract with automatic renewal at 2 years, or
Yeah.
2.5 years if you want to get away from the election cycle,
Yeah.
you're on top of it too. So it depends what the group wants, but
That makes sense.
a 2.5-year kicker, is gonna keep it pretty rock solid.
Right. The capital thing too, Eddie, right? So for example, we have some money coming up in this budget for a squad car. If we take the assets and every new asset we buy is a joint asset, the question then becomes, okay, well, if, for example, if the town said, hey, we want to go our own ways, I mean, the town's going to write the village a buyout check, for cost of replacement, not cost of depreciation. I think that's something to look at going in here. And then just, if what our goal is to build something that, while it won't be impossible to take apart, it's really challenging to take apart, we can do that.
Well, with capital expenses, from a village standpoint, we're not gonna have a lot of oversight on this contract. We'll have some, but not a lot. The last thing that I would wanna do is invest in a ton of capital for the village taxpayers and have a new board come in and have this taken apart. Right now we own 2 squad cars?
Mm-hmm.
We own,
Rifles and equipment.
All the equipment that goes with
Yeah.
said
Computers.
vehicles, yeah.
right. So in the capital equipment that we have right now, what happens to that?
It's ours.
Mhm.
It's our asset.
It's
The
our
town's-
asset
yep.
that they can continue to use.
Yep.
Okay, and is that cost factored into the contract
No.
of services?
So under the previous contract, the chief would make capital recommendations just like other department heads, and the village finance committee and board would contemplate those requests. So let's talk about why separate assets make sense and why separate assets don't make sense, and weigh out the pros and cons. So under the old model, the town had an officer, the village had an assigned officer that was an employee of the town. And so you needed 2 squads. So it made sense that the town owned the squad, the village owned the squad. What we're proposing here is that officer is going to drive across the jurisdictional boundaries seamlessly, and we're only going to have one officer on shift, which, okay, maybe for subsequent divorce reasons, it would make some sense to continue to have 2 squads, and the officer's going to drive town squad on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every other Sunday, right, and village squad alternate. But maybe it just makes more sense to have combined assets and some kind of a buyback provision here that says, and I've dealt with this in another community, and the reason I bring up depreciated versus non-depreciated value is if you have to write a check for replacement cost, that's a completely different animal than saying, I'm gonna write you a check for my half of the value of a clapped out cruiser, right?
Well, those capital costs should be captured in this contract somewhere, so the village does have some protection.
Yeah, I think how it gets teased apart is easy enough to write in. What I'm suggesting is that each board individually is gonna have to okay funding each year. So that it's on the chief to say, hey, boards, here's what I want. You know, this is our capital asset list. We've got 4 cruisers or, you know, whatever it is. This is our rifles, these are our plates and armor and, you know, radios, whatever that is. And we'll, you know, get the lifespan out of them we get. And then when it comes time to replace one of them, you have to get a funding appropriation from both the entities to go ahead with the purchase. And we're effectively just gonna commit capital, but the titles and all those things are gonna be held with both communities' names on the title.
And as we sit right now, all this is, you know, just, we haven't heard from the town yet on what they would agree to or,
Right.
or changes that they want made.
Right.
What process timeframe are we looking at having those discussions with the town on what their thoughts are on what is on this document?
I think the start of this today, and we're gonna kick it around until we get a draft that either we all wanna move forward with or we all wanna walk away from. You know, so the how this draft came to be was conversations over a number of years. This wasn't one that just got plunked down, so it's, you know, in part going back to conversations with Chief Johnson about, you know, if we did a contract amendment update, what maybe should it look like and how could we make it function better. So I guess to your point, you know, town board members here or committee members here have had an opportunity to review this thing. Is there anything in there that's, you know, just, oh, we hate it or we want to amend it in some significant fashion? Or is this
You can't rely too heavily on assets because they have a shelf life,
Sure.
you know, and pretty soon you're replacing stuff. And so you kind of just have to bring them all in and go from there. You know, if you're gonna try and keep track of, well, this is our asset and this is our asset, well, this depreciates quicker
Right.
than that, you know, you're gonna end up in a huge mess with that.
I would propose that, you know, the assets that are there, we age off and dispose of and put the revenues jointly into whatever the new asset is. So when it's time, so I think the village's police cruiser is the next one up for replacement. Is that, you're right?
Yeah, my squad, the SRL squad is
Yeah.
the oldest in the fleet
Yeah.
right now.
So we would, you know, essentially procure the squad, outfit that squad. The cost will be split representatively based on the contract amount, our percentage split. And when we sell off the village's cruiser, even though it's a village asset, we would contribute that into cost of new squad. And just, again, we'd cycle all the town's asset off in the same fashion. Operating it as close to joint as you can. Is there anything that anybody sees from the town side they want to take out of this contract?
I still have concerns about the authority there,
Okay, how so?
because you are not pulling politics out of your police department. Because they are, you're not establishing a commission, and they don't have hiring, firing, and promotion, capability. Here's the example.
Yep.
One of the town board members, one of the village trustees, their son gets arrested.
I understand.
All of a sudden, that the police chief or the officer who made the arrest, the eyes are on them, okay? I look back when I was working for Muskego, there was a time I wrote an alderman a speeding ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no concern that he was gonna come after me in any kind of way, because we had a police and fire commission.
Right.
So I did not answer to our board members or our other people. So that is the cleanest way to do it. I struggle with that. And then in some of that, I think you're giving the board too much authority. Staffing and things like that.
So right now, hiring, firing, promotion, and demotion isn't done according to the whims of a town board, as it were. It's done based on a union contract. So that's why I wrote it that way. Is you under state statute, you either have to have a union contract in place, or if you're a town, a police commissioner, an individual, or a commission. I take no objection at all with the idea of a commission. I understand exactly what you're explaining. And if we wanted to create a separate one like that, that makes sense to me. We could do that. I think we should debate the merits of either a commission or a commissioner. I'd be in favor of a commissioner rather than a commission.
It's kind of like when you go in front of a jury of your peers.
Yep.
Same thing with a commission as
Yep.
opposed to a commissioner, you know.
I wouldn't want the power all in one person.
In person,
No.
yeah.
I like a commission, yeah.
And matter of fact, no disrespect,
Yeah,
Zeke,
I already know how you're gonna feel.
okay.
But it's
Fill
our
us
governance structure, right? So don't make it about me, make it about the structure.
It's not about you.
Right.
Well,
It is, yeah, it is.
it's the chair in the
Right.
office. Village administrator, at the end of the day, your role is financial,
Yeah.
not overseeing a police department, or not having decisions that can affect the police department. Same with fire and EMS, in my opinion.
I hear you. This is how cities are run all across America, right? So it's a village board debate on that piece. I've written it in such a way to keep it consistent. If at the board level you guys want to pull me out and have him report to Adam, pull him out and have him report to Adam, right? The board charges me under Chapter 50 to dispense with day-to-day business. So there are times that for convenience reasons, the chief needs an answer, and he needs an answer right now, right? I'm that contact.
One of the things you also gotta figure is, okay, you know, you would look at it now and say, well, I would never do that. Tim would say, I would never do that. But 5 years down the road, we don't know who's all gonna be on the board as
Exactly.
trustees. So you wanna put those things in effect so that you prevent problems in the future. You know, and I understand that it's very hard to give up control. But, you know, the police chief has to have a lot of authority and staffing and things like that. And there has to be checks and balances in line that he has to answer to. But you have to, you hired somebody, you have to trust them to do their job. And to do it impartially and not to be worried about fear of losing their job
Yep.
if they don't please, you know,
Yep.
somebody that's on the board or, you know, in the
So
village.
I think you're making my point.
So,
That's excellent. Does anyone have a disagreement with the commission? I mean, I think that's a super,
me
I
ask
agree
this
100%,
question.
that's wonderful.
We should have a commission, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't answer to either
Yeah,
board. They're a commission.
non-political, it's, you know, it changes or whatever, yeah.
Zeke,
Yes, sir.
when Chairman Skalinski formed all these committees,
Yes, sir.
and of course, we're on the police committee, I reached out to neighboring municipalities to see how they did it. Because I've always said that no matter what we face, somebody else has already faced it,
Sure.
resolved it, learned from it.
Sure.
You might as well go and talk to those people. Why make the same mistake potentially? But when I talked to East Troy, they, relative to commissions, et cetera, what kind of power does anybody have? They have a hearing board, is what they call it. 2 people. I was kind of surprised by that. And then I said, tell me how it works. And the police chief there, God, what's his name? I forget. But anyways, he said that, for example, he said, if I wanted to fire somebody, it goes to those 2 people. If he fired that person, those 2 people can call him back. And they can shoot him down, and he's got no recourse. He has to live with that.
Bless you.
So, it's actually a question to you is, when does a hearing board or et cetera, do we need a full-blown commission?
So, you know, there are a number of elements provided for under state statute, and that system is also not without failing. So, in Wisconsin, you can have what is known as optional powers. I don't recommend that. So optional powers are a commission that both manages the oversight of day-to-day operations through the chief, sets policies, and conducts hire, fire, promote, demote. This is how the city of Milwaukee manages things. It's why the city of Milwaukee in part has the budget problems that they have, because the commission members become invested in that system sort of standing on its own separate from the needs necessarily of the city itself. or as duly elected representatives, because they're appointed. Most communities don't have what are known as optional powers, and so they divorce the oversight function from the hire, fire, promote, demote, which is what you're referring to when you're saying, hey, I knew I could go do the right thing by the law as an enforcer of the law because the commission had to follow certain process and procedure. So it's called the 7 steps of just cause. And so, it's on the chief in this case for I'm just going to go for a demote or a fire, right? He has to document what occurred, how it's in violation of state statute, and then he has to bring charges against that officer for violation of whatever it is that the officer violated. It provides a protection for the officer, provides some protection for the chief, provides some protection for the employing jurisdiction. Here's where it goes sideways. And this is a village issue. You have members of the commission that don't understand what their role is. And so they want to do things like, well, I want to support the department. That's not your role. Your role is to be an impartial adjudicator of, reviewing the chief's, but really it's supporting the chief or being a check of power on the chief. But oftentimes they think because they're on a police and fire commission, their job is to know everything that's going on within the department day to day. It's not their role. Or to make decisions about fire trucks and apparatus, like that's not their role. Or police cars and apparatus, that's not their role. So what I've at least attempted to write up here is to, under your union contract, to your point, Doug, a lot of it would fall to Chairman Zielinski as to what goes on with discipline, working alongside the chief. Having a commission sort of takes Chairman Zielinski out of that loop, takes the chief out of that loop in large part, unless it's a direct conflict with the law, and it puts those commissioners in the position to adjudicate as impartial, uninvolved day-to-day parties as to what the chief wants to happen. So if the chief says, hey, this officer needs to go, the commission's job is to say, okay, tell me why. Lay out the 7 steps of just cause and what progressive discipline steps you put in place, and then if necessary, terminate. For promotion, it's the same things. There are things called rules of the commission, so they're supposed to be objective and based on merit and performance, not based on whose cousin is who or what political party you belong to. And so it's really a good attempt at being a meritocracy. So I think what I heard is Zeke go write something about a commission and bring that back for further discussion.
I'd like to hear from the chief on what the
Yes.
chief's thoughts are. Obviously, you're coming into a new role. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome to the community.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear, in a perfect world, how you'd like to see things run.
I like the idea of a commission. It's something that is that extra step. I guess I haven't run numbers. I haven't. I'm day 4 now, so
Don't know everything yet? Come on.
pulling numbers. I haven't had an opportunity to get into all the numbers of things yet, or I read through the proposal, and I think it's a good start. There's things that I'm sure I'll have opinions on once I dig in more and get you more numbers or where I think we should be at. My previous position, I operated under a commission. It worked. You just have to inform the commission as to what their actual role is and keep them informed on what the department is. I think that's where sometimes you get the disconnect. But if they're active and involved, like I've seen, our committee members here in both police committees, I don't think you're going to have a problem. The optional powers, again, I think it bogs things down, and there are very few in Wisconsin that actually do the optional powers. And it's my understanding that has to go to resolution in order for it to happen, or referendum in order for it to happen. So I think if we're going to set this up the correct way, I think a commission is important.
And you don't want to give them authority over day-to-day operations, because then you just bog down the system again.
Yes, that's the optional powers piece. So
Yeah.
day-to-day
you don't want
operations
that.
are the chief. So the question comes up around operations, like what should be enforced more or less? Where should enforcement take place? Like those are operation type conversations.
Yeah.
If we've got at least one party that probably believes that 100% of our policing resources should be sitting on East Main Street, watching semis all day long, right? I mean, and they're different neighborhoods, you don't have different feelings about what's going on.
Right. See, and that's part of the problem, everybody has an opinion, but if you haven't done police work,
Yep.
you don't know a lot about police work. You might
Sure.
think you do, but.
All right.
If I can interject real quick here. Previously, when we were working together, I did some research, and like Sauk City and the village of Sauk City has a joint police department. I would look to see people who already have joints, like Ed said. Whatever they drafted works for them, they were just there 6 months ago, so. And that's a city and a village working together.
Yep, and it's been about 30 years, they told me.
Oh, when you talked to them, yeah, because I think you
Together.
sent it to me originally.
Yeah.
Or somebody sent it to me 6, 7
I
months
sent
ago.
it to you, he sent it to me.
Yeah, but I think that's where your starting point. I don't think we should create a whole new wheel when there's stuff out there that we can use as a resource. Have you seen that? Sauk City?
Yeah, my memory of Sauk City is a joint department, not a contracted department. Is that correct?
That is joint, yes,
It's
you are
joint,
correct.
yeah.
If
So-
we're looking for the long term, that's what we should look at together.
Am I hearing that right? We actually want a legal joint department, not a contracted department.
My opinion, yes.
So,
That's a totally different animal.
as far as legality issues with a joint department,
Yeah.
how can that be torn apart if there is another person in your chair and
They can't. The joint department set stones for it. I mean, not saying nothing can ever be
There,
destroyed.
there is something in there, but they have to do.
Contract terms
Yes.
and outs on all those things. So
Yes,
It's an
yeah. It
intergovernmental
was at that
agreement.
last page.
Yeah, it's an intergovernmental agreement, and you can set standards for whatever you want to set, by
Yeah.
X% vote of, both boards, or whatever you want to write. I think if we're gonna, not what I anticipated from previous conversations, but one of my questions is gonna be where do they then live on the books?
What do you mean?
Well, if it's a
The same thing
joint,
you're presenting there with the joint costs and all that kind of stuff.
not what I'm saying, meaning, are they employees of the village, are they employees of the town, are they legally employees of both?
Well, I don't remember, I read it so many months ago.
Police commission applied them themselves.
That's what I'm getting at, it's a.
I have to read it again, it's been a while, but I thought they were, just like, let's say, the PD stays by us, that commission would actually lease that part of the building from.
Right.
Yeah. And they were still using 2 court systems, so,
I like your opinion on the
I
court,
like
so.
the
yes.
combining, but,
Yeah.
if you,
I had mentioned that before, but Tim knows where I'm coming from, and I'll just leave it there.
I think it makes sense to.
in our community cost sharing like that,
And you get money from the
duplication of
state.
services in the town and the village makes no sense.
Right.
As far as court.
God, I've said that for a while.
I agree. We all have probably agreed.
All right, so I'm gonna look up that Sauk City again and look at how so again, my question is just where do the employees live on payroll? Are they living on town books, they living on village books, or is it some third set of books?
I
it's
thought
a
it was a court system.
it's a combined.
Okay,
So they, each community contributes based upon their population. But they're similar to the town and village here.
They were
They're
pretty close,
They're
so
both very similar in size, so it's right around 50% that they're
Let's just say it was 50-50 almost,
putting
yeah.
in, yeah.
do you recall if Sauk City had, optional powers as a part of theirs?
I
No.
know they had a commission, and it was
Yeah.
made up of 2
Yeah.
village, 2 whatever the city or whatever the other one was, and then there was another tiebreaker, I think,
Okay.
the president or
All
whatever.
right, I'll look that one up.
So, yeah, somebody here has a document. I gave it to somebody. It's only,
I got it myself.
it's only like 4 pages or something like that. I think it's not that.
I've seen it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
Could that be distributed to everybody?
yeah, I'll get that out to you guys.
Please. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Looks like, I think, super easy then. What else do we need to discuss? Nothing? No, I didn't. Okay, so joint police department, joint commission, joint legal entity. Any other matters to come before, the 2 committees?
Next meeting.
What, at your last meeting here back in March, I think I presented the question, but, and I know it's being worked on, I know Mike looked at it, but, relative to staffing levels, remember at the joint meeting way back, it was decided, let's do the scientific, you suggested it,
Sure.
How
at
do
the
we
numbers.
get back on that track? I know that when I talked to Chief O'Neill, I think that's high on his list, to make sure we have adequate staffing, et cetera, and not overstaffing, et cetera. So, I don't know where this would come into play, how we could do this, and again, using your word scientifically.
I
Any
might need
thoughts?
more staffing, like a power shift, second, third, on Friday, Saturday, don't know. The numbers would have to show it.
Yeah. So when we looked at everything on our end, what we didn't have was the town
Mr.
salary.
Ulander, did you pull those numbers, did you get those numbers?
I have 1 year's worth. They were not in a very user-friendly format, so I'm going through the process of
Okay.
digitizing them.
Okay, thank you.
So we're gonna do something called anecdotal study, which is Mike. You've been around for a while. How's policing call volume throughout the day? More calls during the day than night, I would presume?
Yeah, day shift is busy, it's steady.
Yep.
Obviously, it's different kinds of call volume that you get on
Yep.
second shift. Second shift is probably, I would say, across the board in law enforcement is the busiest. Second shift for Waterford PD is 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. and that is by far the busiest. That's when you get people coming back from work and school, and you get all kinds of stuff. Just about every variety of call you can probably think of on second shift. So that would be by far and probably has consistently been the busiest shift is second shift. Third shift, depending on, of course, time of year. Summers are busy. Winter is probably the most quiet time of the year is third shift during the cold months of winter. First shift, I would say, stays pretty consistent throughout. Chief, do you have about the same kind of outlook on that?
There's all kinds of theories on staffing. I mean, in some of those theories, you plug in the numbers and it's like, we need,
Yeah.
6 officers on shift all the time, and that is not the case. A lot of that, when I was chief, our staffing needs were determined by me, but I had to go to the town council if I wanted an increase or things like that. And I knew what our needs were. I didn't ask for anything unless I absolutely needed it. And so when I went to them, for staffing, they would. I don't ever remember being turned down, but I wasn't going to the well if I didn't absolutely need it.
Yeah, you're coming back with data and saying, hey, I need X, Y, Z.
Right. So a lot of this, I think the chief has to determine the staffing needs, because the board cannot. Because that's kind of the day-to-day operations. The calls, the board doesn't know. We can give them the number. We can be given the number of calls, but there's a difference between calls. Some calls require one officer. Some calls require more than one officer.
And that's where you mentioned like the chapter situation. That is
Yep.
very
Time consuming.
time
Yeah,
consuming.
they are.
Know that well. I don't know, would you need somebody after school, mostly in the village? I don't know what your numbers are then.
I mean, our call volume for exactly what Mike says, second shift, is car accidents and everything else. seems
So,
to happen.
maybe you have one in both there. That's something that, there again, the chief would have to look at the numbers.
So I'm gonna say this one, that's, we do not take this one as a grenade lob at you in any sort of way. We had a chief look at numbers, and what we ended up with was a referendum in the town for an additional officer, and, staffing that is well beyond what's been contemplated here. And so there is a theory in public administration of organizational creep and organizational bloat. And so the idea of having a civilian governance structure behind it is not just to say, hey, whatever the chief thinks. And I appreciate that a lot. Like, there's a dialogue component to it, but the civil governing authority looking at it going, yeah, except we think this is what we can afford. Right? And there's always a balance back and forth between those. If you said, Zeke, Chief, Mike, money's no object, design a system, I think all three of us would look at each other right now and go, hey, put 3 officers on duty 24/7, 365, and right, nod your heads, right? That sounds pretty good. We don't have to worry about it. But you know, the other side of that is, okay, we'll raise taxes by 30% in both communities to afford that, and, you know, now nobody likes it. So there's gotta be some balance back and
Yes.
forth. I hear you on the, hey, we might need to deploy more here, we might need to deploy more there.
We need to look at he needs to look at the numbers.
Do you recall what the total amount for police spending is from the town right now? You know what the total budget is?
You talking to me?
Yeah.
I don't know what the total
Was
budget
it
is.
780,000 this year?
That was one of the numbers.
I think.
It was seven something, I know that.
It's right around
Yeah.
there.
You guys were a little bit of $500.
Yeah, and you never staff for worst case scenario, you staff
can't.
for the normal, because when you got worst case scenario going on, you call, you know,
Yeah.
the sheriff, you call Burlington, you call, you know,
Your choice, yeah.
other jurisdictions to come and help you, and they will, so.
So one of the things that had come up earlier was there was a referendum. President Houston had me reach out to the municipal league and ask a question. I got an answer back from the municipal league, and that's that referendum funds are not fungible within the town, i.e. because the referendum was passed, those monies have to be dedicated to law enforcement.
Exactly.
They can't be moved over to streets or snow plowing or anything else. So within that 780, you know, one of the questions about cobbling this together is the town bound based on that referendum to continue to spend 780, or does the town have to decrease taxes if we come up with a number less than this to match up? I don't have
We're
any
doing
of
our
the
budget
answers
now,
to
I
that.
don't have an answer. We're doing our budget.
Okay. Tim, a question for you, and that is, in doing joint services, do you anticipate that there will be a reduction in spend from the town on policing?
I'm not expecting it, we wanna move forward with what we have now, if not more.
Okay.
Again, we gotta crunch the numbers and we're gonna start having our budget meetings probably within a week or so.
If there was this joint force,
Yeah.
would it have any bearing at all on getting support, you know, to the SMART program, et cetera, that still stay in place regardless?
I don't think we're gonna be able to qualify for the innovation program except for courts, because we've already had joint contracted services with the town. So it looks to me like, I'll take another look at it, but it looks to me like if you already had that, they just consider that, you know, you've already figured out what efficiencies are there, and you're ineligible. But courts, I think, are open to it, so we haven't had joint courts. So I guess one of the questions that comes up is if we're doing this and the anticipation is that, you know, the town is going to spend the same amount or more, and the village is in a position that from a financial standpoint it needs to spend the same amount or less, then I'm not even sure how to have this conversation, Troy, because now we're back to talking about the sheriff's department, right? So I'm gonna give you some pros and cons, right? This is around the fiscal reality of it, and we're just gonna talk about it. Went and met with the sheriff's department and said, okay, look, they're asking because we're due for contract renewal. Hey, what's going on with the village? When are you gonna get to this? And so they laid out some points for me that we haven't contemplated before, and it, you know, specifically related to, you know, Mike May's position as SRO, which is, you know, as the SRO, the village now pays for 3 months of service on that contract. The school picks up the rest, and so when Mike is not in the school season, he, you know, handles vacation or does other patrol duties. With the sheriff's department as a contracted service, the village doesn't get billed for those 3 month period. They just reassign that officer to go do other duties. So if the village is looking at it as a cost metric one way or the other, and if the town's objective is it's going to spend the same amount or more, and the village is approaching it as the same amount or less, I don't know if those are compatible goals with each other, and that, you know, the village may want to contemplate conversations with the sheriff's department, or it's going to need to discuss how it's going to fund increased expenses if that's the town's goal. So I'm a bit. Some of the conversations have meandered over time to different places from when we had them 6 months ago, what we were looking at 6 months ago. And, you know, where I thought the town was from the last conversation we had was that the town was looking to reduce its overall police expenditure, not necessarily increase it. Sounds like there's been a bit of a change based on the evolving dialogue.
We're doing the budget now, so.
Sure.
We met 3 months ago and we did nothing.
Okay. Troy and Pat, where you guys want to go? Pastor Conrad?
Well, I think we need a clear direction from the town on what their objective is, what budgetary restraints or what you're going to spend, where that comes in at.
Well, do you guys know what you're gonna spend or what you're willing to spend on police?
We know what we're spending right now and we'd like to reduce it.
So in this year's budget draft, what we put forward is $225,000 in funding for policing, and that was based on the idea that we would be sharing officers jointly across the jurisdiction. And so, in me going back in the napkin math, I anticipated you guys were gonna end up with some similar and proportional reduction in spend, again, because we're sharing officers.
Well, it depends. We have a new chief, he's researching the numbers, but again, I mean, we still have, nothing changed. I just met with the chief the other day and we had 2 squads in the village here handling longer cases that occurred in the village.
Sure.
I mean, when you guys get something, you get something that's sort of big. You know, I'm not gonna lie to you. Maybe you're not made aware of that, but when something happens in the village, it's a lot bigger than a town issue. And it takes several hours. Example, you know, how long did our officer just sit with that guy that was arrested in the village?
6.
6 hours, because we had to wait for Milwaukee to come get him?
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, to your point, Tim, I had a chapter I had to deal with the other day, and
Yeah, and another one, I don't wanna bring down the set.
Yeah.
Yeah, back when I dealt with them, yeah, it's time consuming, and I heard it's worse now.
I just don't think you guys all said public safety is a big thing. Again, we're working on our budget, our board will meet, we'll find the best direction to go, but I'm not looking to reduce public safety.
What was your budget this year?
so we have a portion of our budget that does not get spent, so it's like a reserve capacity.
Okay.
Give me a second.